From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
The state's new education commissioner comes to Rhode Island by way of New York. Replacing his predecessor, Deborah Gist, presents a challenge in itself in regaining the trust of teachers after a tense relationship they had with the former commissioner. We examine where he stands on standardized testing as a graduation requirement and for teacher evaluations. Our guest this week on Newsmakers, State Education Commissioner Ken Wagner. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Ted Nesi is off this week, so filling in on the panel is WPRI.com reporter Dan McGowan. Good morning, everyone. And Ken, welcome to Rhode Island. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Commissioner, so we are going to tackle a lot of specific education policy questions here, and we have a lot of important items to go through. But I want to get your opinion on this first. Up until now, you've spent your entire career in New York, in the state of New York. You've been in Rhode Island for all of 3 months right now. What are your initial impressions?
So first, let me just start. The reason why I came to Rhode Island, or was interested in coming to Rhode Island from New York, is there's just a lot of exciting things going on. Governor Raimondo has assembled a team that's completely committed to joining what we're doing in education, to our work to rejuvenate and revitalize our communities through economic development. So the idea of working in partnership across the aisle, from education, my colleague Stephen Pryor in Commerce, my colleague Scott Jensen in Department of Labor and Technology and Training, and Jim Purcell in Higher Ed, really working together to support kids and support adults in our state is exactly the reason why I wanted to come here and get to work, roll up our sleeves, and get some good stuff done.
Well, let's roll up our sleeves on some policies then. And we're going to start with standardized testing. Using standardized tests as a graduation requirement has been a hot button topic here for a couple of years. We have the Park exam, as you know. Under the Wagner administration, what role will tests play in students' ability to earn a high school diploma?
So this is a really important conversation. The way I've introduced myself to the state is I came through public education as a school psychologist. I have been trained to really come into a situation and not come out with the answers, but try to learn from the great work that's been happening, the perspectives that people have, and really listen. But then you can't just listen forever. You have to start to roll up your sleeves and get some work done. One of the things that I've heard is people are concerned that the current diploma requirements are too narrow, and they worry that students won't have an opportunity to demonstrate their way of learning and their pathway through high school through the diploma requirements. To me, that's very compelling, and I think that we can find a way to maintain the meaning of a high school diploma, maintain the rigor, while expanding options for students to demonstrate the way that they've gone through.
What kind of options would we be looking at here?
So the reason for the introduction of a standardized assessment in the first place was people are concerned that the current graduation requirements are based solely on local criteria. You have to pass a certain number of tests, you have to pass a local portfolio assessment, and we know that courses are different from one community to another. You take algebra in one community and you take it in a different community, it's just going to be different. That's just natural. Same thing, grades are different. An A might not be the same thing as an A in another community. So the idea to introduce a test is that we have some measure that's comparable across communities. So when a student or a graduate goes to get a job with an employer or goes to apply for colleges, they're not being judged based on the reputation of their community, the reputation of their high school. They're not being prejudged, but they're coming in with a credential that was benchmarked against a meaningful standard. I just believe that there's more than one way to demonstrate that meaningful standard. So, for example, right now it is the Park assessment. And if you take the Park once and you fail it, you take the Park a second time and you fail it, then you have the opportunity to take additional assessments, then you have the opportunity to go through a waiver process, then you have the opportunity to go through an appeals process, and so on. That's a narrow, progressive process that isn't quite student-friendly. It's a lot of bureaucratic stuff that the student has to go through. So the question I have is, can we open up that process, make it wider, or make it parallel? So if a student is going to take the SAT anyway, maybe we can have the SAT at a certain threshold count toward that graduation requirement. If they're going to take the ACT, maybe they're enrolled in AP courses. Maybe they're part of a high-quality CTE program with an industry credential that's attached to that. Maybe they've gone through a dual language program. They're fluent in 2 languages. So maybe there might be multiple ways for them to demonstrate that they've achieved what we want them to achieve with a credential, but it's not narrow and bureaucratic, it's wider and student-friendly.
When do you expect to make that decision? We've got the class of 2020 will be the first class that's supposed to follow this graduation requirement. They're going to be freshmen next year. When do you expect to actually have a plan in place for this?
Yeah, I think it's very, very important that this is not Wagner coming up with a great idea or a bad idea and just kind of imposing it on the state. So I've talked about this virtually every time I've talked to anyone in the media since I've been introduced to Rhode Island. I've talked about this when I've met with teacher unions, when I've met with principals, when I've met with school committee members, when I've met with superintendents. So we've been talking about this for the 3 months that I've been here. And just this past week, we had a public conversation with our P12 council, and they pretty much gave us the go-ahead to bring this to a wider audience and bring it out to the public and do sessions across the state. That's going to take time, so it's not going to happen right away, but by taking the time and talking to people, we will make better decisions than we would otherwise if we just made it up on our own.
Right, but the longer you go, the more you run into that sort of cliff at the end where people say, oh, we weren't prepared for this, we didn't know it was coming. So, you know, is it next year by the time these kids enter, you know, their freshman year in high school? Is that the goal, or is it later than that?
So if we do nothing, this year's 8th graders, you can drive down the street and go look at them. This year's 8th graders have to pass the park with the narrow progressive process that I described before. If we do nothing, what I'm suggesting is we might want to do something. We might not want to do something, or we might want to. So the two issues that would be on the table is what the it is, what is it that we should do, and when, how, what the process should be, and both of those things are
So
on
it
the
sounds
table.
like the class of 2020 shouldn't expect, if you had your way, to have that narrow park exam as a standardized test.
What I would say to the class of 2020 is we absolutely need you to enter the world with a diploma that means something across Rhode Island, means something to employers, means something to colleges, and means something in the other states as well. Exactly what that diploma is going to look like is something that we want to talk about.
Should parents be allowed to opt their kids out of the park exam?
So the park exam is really serving two purposes. And first, the most important thing to say is Park is just a service provider. It's just an organization that we're partnering with to build an exam to measure student progress on our learning standards, the Common Core learning standards.
That's not what it means to parents, of course. Park is a test to parents that their kids take.
So we need to help parents understand that Park is a service provider who's built a test, which means that we could use Park's test or we could use another test. We've spent a lot of time and energy investing in the quality of the Park exam, so I wouldn't recommend that we switch. But we could, and that's something that's important to realize. There's two purposes of the Park exam. One is there's a federal requirement that every state in the country has to test all of their students on the same test in grades 3 through 8 annually, and at least once in high school in English, math, and science. The Park serves that function. We have to meet that federal requirement, or we have a couple $2 billion on the table that the feds could do something with. The second piece is I really believe that we need a common measure of student progress, so we just know how our kids are doing collectively against learning standards, expectations, grade level expectations that are designed to prepare our kids for the future. We need to know how they're doing. If we don't have a common measure, we won't know how they're doing other than relying on school-based classroom assessments.
So what I'm hearing is you as commissioner want them to take the test, but my question is, should parents be allowed to opt their kids out?
So there's a number of ways of approaching that. First, the federal government requires that at least 95% of the students participate in the exams. So what that means, if you're really going to get down to it, is they contemplate 5% of our kids not taking the test. And historically, that's been for students who were sick, or they just had some difficulties on that day, or whatnot. So we have 5% leeway. If we want to go beyond the 5%, we just need to be very cognizant of the fact that we would be violating current federal laws and regulations. But that's a bureaucratic answer. The most important answer is the parent answer, is why would you not want to know how your children are doing on a measure that is common across the rest of the state? Why wouldn't you just want to have that as a piece of information? I'm not saying we should stress over the test. I don't want to hear about kids who are getting stomach ulcers. We need our kids to relax about the test. The test is just an opportunity for them to tell us what they know and can do. The big problem, in my mind, is not the test. It's the test prep. And not smart test prep, like we're going to take the test on our computer, so we should practice so they know what the computer test looks like, but the kind of rote, excessive, drill and kill test prep that just sucks the life out of the classroom. And let me be very clear, that's bad teaching, that's bad for kids, that's bad for teachers, that's bad for the teaching profession, that's bad for families and parents, and we should stop. But it's not incompatible though. The best preparation for a test, a high quality test, is great teaching. And we should just focus on great teaching, and then the students will do just fine on the test.
I want to stay on Park for just another minute. You talk to superintendents around the state, teachers, everyone's prepared for these scores to come back in just a few weeks or months, and they're expected to be terrible. What are you doing, what is RIDE doing to prepare parents and school districts for what appears to be probably pretty low test scores?
Yeah. So in our conversation with our P12 Council, the statewide governing board responsible for education in the state, we reviewed some of the history. And these conversations did not start with Race to the Top. In fact, there was a statewide group that met in 2002, so 13 years ago, and at least 7 years before Race to the Top was even contemplated, that talked about what do we want for our kids, and it highlighted some concerns. So one concern was that there was wide variability in the learning experiences across school communities across the state in Rhode Island. Another thing was that our students were graduating from high school and it did not seem that they were prepared for whatever was next. Another finding was that student performance from 4th grade to 10th grade was actually decreasing over the time. Another finding was that students were not getting the kind of personalized experiences where instruction was really tailored to their unique learning style. So all of those things that we're talking about now were things that we were talking about 13 years ago. And part of the strategy 13 years ago as well as now was to have that kind of common measure. So again, the Park results are the first time that we're going to have results based on new learning standards.
Are you expecting them to Dan's question, are you expecting them to be tough, to be bad?
Yeah. The new learning standards are anchored to, we didn't make them up. We said, okay, and we talked to employers and we talked to colleges. What are the kinds of things that our kids need to do when they apply for jobs or when they go on to college? And they told us they need to be able to think critically, they need to be able to solve problems, they need to be creative, they need to be able to analyze text, both fiction and nonfiction, and they need to be able to explain themselves in writing and verbally. I think we can all agree those are the right goals for kids. Then the question becomes, how do you get there? How do you get there in 10th grade, 8th grade, 6th grade, and so on? The only purpose of the Park test, again, just a service provider, is to tell us how our kids are doing on those goals. Will the results be tough? Yeah, they're going to be tough. People have released results before. When I was in New York, we released results. Kentucky has released results. Smarter Balanced folks on the West Coast have released results. Massachusetts has released results. Illinois has released results. All of those states, when they released the results, they found that their kids were not where they thought they would, and they had work to do. It just means we have to roll up our sleeves and get the work done. It is not an indictment of our schools. It's not a criticism of our teachers. It's not a criticism of our students. It just means that we've raised the bar to prepare our kids for the future, and we have some exciting work to do over the coming years.
We have to take a break. When we come back, we have a lot of other things to discuss, including charter schools. Stay with us. Our guest this week is Dr. Ken Wagner, the State Education Commissioner. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right, WPRI.com reporter Dan McGowan. Our guest this week is Dr. Ken Wagner. He's the Commissioner of Education for the state of Rhode Island. We have to wrap up the standardized testing conversation because we spent the entire first half on it. That said, what role, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but what role should standardized tests play in teacher evaluations?
Gotcha. That's a great question, and I know that there's a lot of anxiety around the role of assessments in teacher evaluations. People are worried about their careers and their reputations and their livelihood, and we need to be respectful of that. To the extent that our teacher evaluations are supporting the improvement, the continuous improvement of teaching and learning, and teachers just getting better at their crafts and student learning even more, we're on the right track. To the extent that using test scores or anything else about evaluation is distracting from improving teaching and learning, we're on the wrong path. And when I say distraction, I don't want to focus on formulas. I don't want to focus on percentages. I don't want to focus on gotcha of what percentage of people are in different categories. What I want to focus on is let's give meaningful feedback to teachers so they can always, everyone can get better at what they do. I can get better, everyone can get better. And the only purpose of factoring in student performance on standardized tests is to help that process.
But do you see a percentage of the PARCC exam to be part of the, you have the in-class visits, you have the feedback from the administration. Is standardized tests one of those pillars?
So the observation piece is really important to talk about professional practice and get better at professional practice. I personally believe that student performance, I'm not saying the PARCC per se, because only about 20% of our teachers actually teach a course that leads to the PARCC assessment, so the rest of the 80%. But I do believe that student performance is a meaningful component of teacher evaluation.
And the question then is, how that's measured is what you're saying.
So the rest of it is how we go about doing that.
Okay.
I want to ask about charter schools. It doesn't matter who you talk to, but governor, teachers, charter school leaders, everybody sort of agrees that charter school funding needs to be revisited within the school funding formula. So you've been here a few months, you've heard certainly this problem. What are you doing to address that issue?
So we're looking forward to having a conversation. It'll be a statewide conversation, not a Department of Education conversation per se, with lots of partners to figure out. We have a portable funding system where if students move from one place to the other, the funding follows the students. And the question that districts have rightfully raised has been maybe too much of the money is following the student and some of the costs actually stay around even if the student goes to another school. It's not just a charter school issue though. We have the exact same issue with CTE education. Career and technical education is the exact same issue. A student in one community may go to another community for a high quality career and technical education program. So we have to figure that out because it's getting in the way of the work so we can support teaching and learning.
Do you expect legislation to be introduced in the next session regarding that? On your end, legislation you could support, not just legislation that maybe the unions push or another group pushes.
From what I understand, there is broad consensus that we have to take a look at making the fix that I just talked about, and I think we'll figure out how to do that. Are you
looking to appoint a study commission in any way to study this?
The Department of Education will not be the lead agency on that, so we're looking forward to working with the conversation once it's established.
The state of Rhode Island is the size of many counties in other states, and there's been a lot of talk about a statewide teacher contract rather than this patchwork of collective bargaining agreements among 36 or so school districts. Do you think we should have a statewide teacher contract?
I think we should have the conversation. I think that we should be very careful in the conversation to make sure that if we do something, it has a benefit, and it has a benefit that is affordable by our communities. So we have to balance efficiencies with cost, with supporting teaching and learning. I think there's two categories of good things that could happen. Is there the opportunity for some economies of scale for purchases that all school districts are making? So for example, if we're all buying health insurance, might we be able to get better prices on health insurance, for example, if we do it together as opposed to individually? That's an efficiency piece. The other thing is might there be some exciting things that we could do in terms of programs to support teaching and learning in schools. So for example, I think teacher leadership is absolutely critical in empowering our schools to do their work well, and we don't currently have roles for teachers to step into. Right now it's typically you're either a classroom teacher or you move into become a principal, for example. But there's great roles that teachers could take on: writing curriculum, curating instructional resources, professional development, serving as leaders side by side with the principal. And one thing that you could do in a statewide contract is create those roles so districts could put teachers into leadership positions to help principals in a more efficient way.
Rhode Island has some of the highest student absenteeism rates in the country, particularly in some of those urban districts, Providence, Central Falls. Do you think parents should be held more accountable, punished maybe, for having high absenteeism rates with their kids?
I think people need to understand that every day matters, and a student who misses a day of school has missed a crucial part of their opportunity to take charge of their future moving forward. And especially students who are chronically absent, so absent 10 or 20 or 30 days, they're literally putting their lives at risk, the rest of their lives. People talk about stress. There's nothing more stressful than being unemployed or not being able to feed your family. And when you have students with chronic absenteeism, that really puts their lives at risk. And we need to help families understand that. We need to address the complex things that might contribute to chronic absenteeism. And what Rhode Island has done so well, in coordination with our colleagues in the Department of Health and our colleagues at Rhode Island Kids Count, we've really surfaced those data so we can shine a light on the issue, and then we can roll up our sleeves and figure out how to solve it.
We forgot to remind you to shut your cell phone off before coming on the program. That's okay.
No worries.
It's happened before. Look, one of the things that lawmakers might tackle this year is should there be binding arbitration for teachers? What do you think?
It's a great question. I don't know that I know enough about the issue to comment on it in a way that would be helpful.
So contract dispute resolution is always a big thing that you have to deal with in different districts. And in New York, where you worked, you had the Taylor Act for teacher strikes. They can strike, but they lose 2 days' pay for every day out, or the 1 for 2, 2 for 1. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. Would that work here?
Again, I'm a straight shooter. I just don't know enough about it.
Do you think teachers should have the ability to strike? They can't in Rhode Island right now. They can do work to rule, things like that, but should they have the ability to strike?
I think all of us as public servants who are entrusted with the public good need to obey the law.
Okay, Dan?
When you, I was at a conference a few months ago, and Education Secretary Arne Duncan spoke, and he said one of his biggest regrets of his time in Washington was that education didn't become sort of a hot button issue, particularly in the presidential race in 2012. Flash forward to right now, you're not seeing very much education talk from either the Republican or the Democratic candidates for president. Is that a concern for you? Is education a back burner topic right now?
Yeah, and that's where I think Governor Raimondo is exactly right. Education is an investment in our communities, in our future, in our economy, in our way of life, and the survival of our state and our country. And it absolutely should be front burner in every conversation that we have about the health of our state or our country. Speaking of Arne Duncan, he's being replaced now by John King, your former colleague. What should people know about John King? John is just one of the most courageous people I know, and we are just fortunate to have him, supporting the nation's children. But the work happens in the state. We're charged with overseeing education in our states. I'm thrilled to do the work here in Rhode Island, and John's job is to help us get our jobs done here in Rhode Island. Have you talked at all to former Education Commissioner Deborah Gist, either when you got this job or when you were thinking about taking it? I sent Deborah a note thanking her for her service in Rhode Island and just introducing myself, and she responded back that she would love to, connect if the moment arose. And that hasn't happened yet? No, I've only been here 3 months. Okay, and to that, we like to ask, cast a wide net, Dan and I, when we have a guest on the show, and what would you like to hear from the Education Commissioner? And one parent from Warwick brought this topic up. Warwick it's a big school district for Rhode Island. They're in turmoil right now. Teachers, from my understanding, reading the press coverage there, I haven't covered it myself, but they're without a contract, and they're in a work to rule mode where they do only what's required in the contract. They show up when they're supposed to, and they leave at the end of the day. And then there's school consolidation there that's upsetting a lot of people. I know you've only been here for 3 months. Question might be slightly unfair, but a lot of people in Warwick are concerned about this. How involved, if at all, is your office in Warwick, and at what point will you step in? Yeah. So we need to make sure that we keep in mind that there are adult issues, and then there are issues with the students, with the children. And we need to make sure that when we as adults have issues, that we work through them, we take them serious, we're respectful of each other and so on, but we absolutely need to keep the students out of that, protected from that, shielded from that just as much as possible, and we need to focus on the students when we do our jobs, and we need to focus on the adults when we have our differences of opinion. So I'm sure that the people of Warwick are as aware of that as I am and as our team is, and I'm sure that they'll do the right thing by their kids while they work through these issues. My department stands ready to support them in their personnel issues, if that's the case, in their school facility issues or organizational issues, as that's the case. But we respect the autonomy of the local district to solve their problems, and we look forward to supporting them if they need our help. We have very little time left here, just about a minute. Conventional wisdom is teachers' unions have a lot of clout up at the General Assembly. Have you gotten that sense coming here? Is labor strong in Rhode Island? Labor is advocating for the needs of their members. They have every interest, as I do, for teachers to be at the top of their game and being the best professionals they possibly can be, and I look forward to talking with them about that.
This is the most important question you're going to get in any interview that you do in Rhode Island. All your years in New York, does that make you a New York sports fan?
So fortunately, I know nothing about sports.
So that's an honest answer. You're not going to say you're a Giants fan. You're not going to say you're a Yankees fan.
Giants is baseball?
It is in San Francisco. I have a feeling you're not being completely honest about this because you know it's a good answer, actually. It's the best answer we've gotten on that one. All right. Well, listen, welcome to Rhode Island, and we hope you have all the success as the Education Commissioner, and we'd like your commitment here to check back in on, from time to time and come as a guest on Newsmakers.
Glad to continue the conversation.
Dr. Ken Wagner, Education Commissioner for the state of Rhode Island, thank you very much. For Dan McGowan, I'm Tim White. If you missed any of it, it's online. As always, WPRI.com. And we will see you next week on Newsmakers.
Good job, Tim.